Now, ahead of the general elections in a few weeks' time, Moody's investors are warning that South Africa may struggle to make progress resolving the country's long-standing challenges. That's if a coalition government emerges. This is in relation to sluggish economic growth, curbing chronic power shortages, and reducing very high unemployment, they say. For more on this, we're joined by Economist Miriam Altman. Miriam, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. I remember reading this article during the week and saying, but that's the situation we are in now with one party in government.
Yeah, you know, the article that I saw the Moody's article in News 24, and I think the article by Carol Payton last week was maybe more informative about how the election might come out and what impact it might make on policy. You know, the reality is that the ANC internally has been fractured and has a range of ideological positions within it, and we're dealing with a lot of coalitions at local government level as well. You know, so we're dealing with this anyway. We may just find this more of a continuation than a major change.
And this is really, I mean, the challenge, isn't it? Perhaps one should maybe ask the question: what is it, you know, that is, or what are the things, the sort of things that have held the current government back, even before we start talking about possibility of coalitions?
Well, you know, we have a national problem that I've spoken about on your show before as well, is that we've had low growth in South Africa, frankly, since the 1960s, with very few periods of real growth. And a unique period was in the 2000s for about 5 years when we saw a higher growth rate. So we've really got to be looking at our political system, the quality of leadership, the commitment of and engagement of civil society in that leadership, and in the kind of and making sure that we continue with the kind of reforms that are happening. You know, the key ones being obviously in infrastructure, energy, transport, water, but also the reform of municipal services.
Well, talk us through, I mean, perhaps those reforms in greater depth, because, I mean, Aurelian Mali of Moody says, and I quote, "The current government has made incremental progress on these issues," and is talking about economic growth, is talking about power shortages, and of course, that record high unemployment rate. To someone who's, especially during this period where you're hearing all sorts of versions from the various political players who are obviously, I mean, electioneering, but also, I mean, the governing party, which obviously wants to stay in power.
You know, those who are electioneering should maybe get their act together a little bit better if they want to be a proper opposition, is the thing. The ANC is clearly still going to be the dominant party. The most critical issues that we need to start seeing and have been charted through, you know, as you know, around energy is the breakup of Eskom, the ability of companies to generate their own energy, the ability of municipalities to procure energy, that Eskom itself is starting to improve in terms of its performance and energy availability, which is what it promised to do. In transport, we've seen some major reforms coming through the regulatory system and through change in leadership in Transnet, and a real introduction now of private participation. PROSA, it appears, I'll wait for the evidence, but it appears that many of the lines have now come back into operation. And I'm still checking that out, but I'm not sure to what extent it's really operating again. But from what I know, at least a lot of the lines are operating again. We know we've got a permanent DG now in water and sanitation nationally, Sean Phillips, who's starting to really move the dial around performance. And Treasury's been driving turnaround strategies in some of the major metros around water, sanitation, municipal electricity, these kinds of services. So there are some really important initiatives. But the critical issue, and this is where civil society, and I'm including business and communities in that term is to be driving and focusing on making sure that the kind of quality of leadership that's needed is in place in their mayors, in their city managers, even in the principals of their children's schools.
Of course, I mean, you would have seen or read skeptics saying the changes we're seeing at Eskom have very little to do with efficiencies or turning the corner. It's got everything to do with elections. The same has been said about the leadership changes we've seen recently at Transnet, that ahead of an election, every attempt has been or is being made to make it look like things are indeed changing when in reality they aren't.
Well, I think the private sector gave a vote of confidence in the new CEO, and who's been in Transnet for a long time, and that's what you need. You need leadership probably from within, and real movement towards these kinds of partnerships. After the election, will things be unraveled? Who knows? This is generally a bit of a volatile context, which is not atypical of a developing country context, which we have to accept we are. You've got the quality of leadership like Mteto Nyati, who's chairman of Eskom, and a new CEO who cares about plant leadership at the plant level. And the German report that the Treasury commissioned focuses on that question of leadership and the ability of plant managers to get their job done, which seems to be the current focus, which is really what was needed all along to begin with. And that does seem to be what their focus is. I don't think they've reached their energy availability target in Eskom yet, but it is ratcheting up. So, maybe it's electioneering, but these are real numbers and real changes that I think we can grab onto and feel positive about. We've also got to be careful. We have a thing in South Africa, a kind of bipolar characteristic, of everything's great, or, like when the rugby team wins the World Cup, then we're fantastic, or we're terrible and everything's falling apart. And the reality is that we chug along, and that's not good enough. But the reality is that through and through all of these challenges, we seem to chug through. And the real question is, how do we start getting past that chugging through that we've been doing for the past, not just 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but 50 or 60 years. We've got to break through that and get onto a growth trajectory that starts to deal from a long-term perspective on unemployment. And then, and then I should say,
yes.
Sorry?
You can continue.
Oh, well, some of the key things also are things that we don't often hear enough about. For example, we're supposed to be densifying housing and creating livable human settlements. And that people may not see that, but employment is very much about one thing leading to another, and people being able to connect to opportunity, to seeing what the opportunities are, to creating networks. And we need to start focusing on the real things that matter to people, like the quality of housing and the quality of human settlements, the access to social services, the proximity to economic activity, the quality of recreational facilities are absolutely critical to to job creation, quite frankly. And we need more debate about these more basic core issues and not get sidetracked on side issues.
Granted, and I accept that fully. But just to finish or from where on the point that on what actually gave rise to this conversation that you and I are having now, which is the Aurelian Mali of Moody saying, and I'm quoting him for the very last time, the election raises the possibility that policies from comparatively radical parties, including policies not friendly to investors, will emerge. Take us through such possibilities, if you will, and whether, in fact, tell us whether, in fact, you agree with Mali of Moody's on this one.
So I think the Moody story is sensationalist, and I'm guessing that investors have taken on board already what the volatility is in relation to this election. Of many elections. This isn't the only one. We have so many challenges at a local level and in service delivery that I think that they probably have already counted that in. Globally, we're also in a context where a lot of countries are going through this or worse. So South Africa, strangely, is doing okay relative to kind of some crazy stuff going on around the world. So I suspect that it's already built in. If we have another Nene moment, you know, when a good finance minister and DG are alienated out of their jobs for, you know, obviously someone who is trying to enable corruption, you know, then I could imagine that kind of falling out that happened at that time. But bar that, I think that markets have already costed in these kinds of issues. The kinds of things one will be watching out for are the reverse of the list I gave you when I opened. You know, the energy reforms we've seen, the freight transport, passenger transport improvements, the changes in municipal turnaround strategies, you know, these kinds of efforts. The presidency's now in at Tequeni with a special initiative. You know, these kinds of initiatives, they're hard to set up, and they may be hard to unravel because some of them are embedded in new regulation, and that's not so easy to change. So I don't, and I think the ANC will still be, you know, the dominant party. I don't see this kind of Nene moment, if you remember what I mean, happening. Because the Nene moment's the concern. If something like that happens, but I don't see that happening as a result. I think this is more of the same, and that's not necessarily a good thing. In other words, we need to start seeing some strong leadership to make step change improvements in delivery, to start eating dramatically into unemployment as we were in the 2000s. But I don't see a falling out and a crisis moment imminent. That's not my reading of it.